set up the installation of WordPress now. You can create your user and everything. And then basically I'll show you. The first thing you do is once you get the installation set up. All right, so once you do your installation, you've got your, everyone's installed WordPress. There's your WP config file.
This is a little one. There you go.
So you've got your WP config file. I guess I can come here.
Perfect.
So the first thing you want to go in is add this line. I've commented it out because I've already went through the process of installing. And once you do that, then in your tools menu, you'll see a network tab. And you'll go there, and then you generally on a web server, you've got an option of either doing a subdomain so that the sites would be food.example.com, bar.example.com, or you can do folders where it would be example.com/food/bar as you add new sites. Previously, I'll get into it a little bit, but there's a plugin called domain mapping, which allows you to rewrite those URLs dynamically, so they're not going to be food.example.com, it can be example2.com, so that you're not necessarily stuck with just one URL and the subdomains. You can host different sites that are completely different from each other. But when you do that, previously you could only do that domain mapping if you did subdirectory installations. Doing subdirectory installations requires a few more things as far as editing your Apache config file. Subdomain, you have to edit your Apache config file. And even with domain mapping, you still need to do some things like that. But now you can do domain mapping with folders. So depending on how you're setting the site up, you can do either or. I prefer the subdomains just because it's a little more separated out. You're not getting confused with your, then you wind up with blog. Does it default to blog/food and blog/bar? I think it does. So there's some issues there, but it depends on your purpose. There's some things that you can do to work around that. But but on a localhost install, you can't do subdomains, so that doesn't matter. So then once you do that, you can't switch from one to the other once you do an installation. You're pretty much stuck with the one or the other. So it's something you really need to think about before you do the installation. But pretty much it gives you what to add back into your WP config file. It gives you a new set of htaccess rules, and then you're good to go. Now you're set up with your multi-site installation. There's two other caveats with that. Most people have done single WordPress installations. You just have your WP content folder, and then you have your uploads folder, and then it does it by month and date. With the multi-site installation, you need to create a blogs.dir directory inside your WP content folder, and then it will automatically create folders based on site ID. So your first site is 1, second site is 2. It's an arbitrary number, but as you add each new site, it creates a folder for that and then creates the hierarchies in there. Now the URL for people looking at an image or something like that is still going to look like the regular path, but that's all done with those htaccess rules that it gives you. And then, so that's pretty much the only caveats as far as the difference between a regular WordPress install and the next. So any questions, or I kind of left this loose as far as I wanted to know what people were looking for in this and what I could offer up as experience from, I personally right now with the company I work with have about 300 client sites running off of 2 different multi-site installations. We've got them separated for some because of industry, and so some in one industry use a specific set of tools. It's no sense in having those on the other set of people, and then I could do some other things with their content to help promote them. So, yeah.
You talk about taking 1 or 2 or 5 standard WordPress installs and how the best way to import them into one.
If you're just worried about content and you're not worried about necessarily all of your options that you've got set or your widgets that are contained, you can simply just do the WordPress export and then import that content into your new site, move over your theme files into your regular WP content themes folder, whatever plugins. And I'll touch on some of those tricks, or not so much tricks, but trickiness that you've got to deal with when you're dealing with clients, and it varies. And that's one thing to keep in mind is that, I was going to show this too, is that it's all one database. It will create the same way with, if the site ID is 2, and I'll show you this in.
Yeah.
What's that?
For better or worse, sometimes.
Right,
it can-
and which is,
yeah.
exactly, so if you've got everybody compartmentalized in their own database, maybe from a security standpoint or a backup standpoint or something, goes odd, you only lose one site versus if your database gets corrupted or something crashes or something like that, all of the sites you have in that one table are there. So that's something else to keep in mind. You're not dealing with separate individual databases, so people can't necessarily have access to that database for those. Like, you can't give a client FTP access to their site and access to their database. It's all from your inside. So it depends on what your business model is, or whether if it's individuals. Even an individual person, if you've got 6 or 7 different hobbies, that you've got different blogs all over the place, you've got family members that have blogs, it's convenient for that. I'm talking about this more from the approach from professionals who do client work with WordPress. So those are some of the caveats, but I was just going to show that you can see that this is all one single database, and each new site is adding tables, and then you've got your global tables at the bottom, the tables for the main site. So go back over to the dashboard, and so you get a new administrator. It's a new level of ACL called the super admin. In WordPress multi-user, it was called site admin. So it's a little different vernacular. Likewise, now they're called sites, not blogs, and it's a network, not MU in that sense. But so you've got a new set of menus. One thing you definitely want to look at when you're doing that, you've got a set of options that you definitely want to look at, because some of this has to do with, as you create new sites, what's going to happen. So I'll just kind of scroll down, you can kind of see. Another thing to touch on is that the original principle behind WordPress multi-user, and now it's built into multi-site, was the idea was that you could set up a website and allow anybody to sign up and register and get a blog, as WordPress.com does. You can limit it to just a certain email address. So like, let's say you're doing an intranet for your company, and you want to have anybody in the company be able to sign up and have a blog. You could set that default as only the people with this email address can register on this site. So if they come in with a Gmail account, they can't get a blog, but if they've got mycompany.com, then they can get a site and be added in and get a subsite. So there's some options there. But from a sense of using it for client type work, I turn registrations off and do those types of things so that you're manually adding those people in. You've also got your options to how these are also, I think, in the regular WordPress. What the email says when someone when you've created a blog for them, or whether you're doing open registrations, you can define and customize your messages. Likewise. Now I have a couple plugins that I'll show you that's another, actually in WordPress, you can have a folder called MU-plugins, which now stands for must use, versus previously it was multi-user. And if you put a file in that folder, it automatically is active and is running. There's no activation process, there's nothing else. It's just automatically fired whenever it's going. So there are some things that you want to put there that you're hiding from clients, or that you want to work across the board and you just don't want to have to mess with. And so there's a couple of plugins that I found that help customize the environment and allow you to do some things when you're creating sites. And I'll show you a couple of those are, but here's another option that you need to pay attention to, is what can be uploaded. So by default, these are unchecked. So when someone were to set up, if you don't have this checked off, they're like, hey, why can't I upload pictures? This would be where you would look for something like that. So again, it's not quite just like being able to automatically set up individual WordPress installations. There are configurations and controls that, as whoever that person is, you have to be cognizant of as you're setting up the environment. But once you have them set up, now here's this menu settings, and actually she's not here yet. I guess she's already left for the day. But there's one plugin that I've added where you can actually limit what menu items anybody sees, regular users. These wouldn't be affected by super administrators or site administrators with these checkboxes. And actually, you could do that, but you can hide posts, you can hide links, especially things like delete blog. or import, if you don't want people to be able to accidentally import stuff in over top of their content or something like that. But delete blog would be a great one. You don't want them to, somebody get in and just delete their site. If you don't want them to be able to change the theme, if you want to hide that from them, that's one good way. You can just uncheck the appearances. I'm not exactly sure. There's one issue with widgets because it's tied into the dashboard. That's one that's a little bit more. So if you're trying to completely keep people away from that, that's a little tricky. There's some ways that you can hide it in the menu. It's there if they know where to look, and you like just type in the URL. But
yeah, is that what this does? Is it just hide it from the menu?
No, this actually removes it.
Removes it?
This removes it out. If you're not hiding the URL in this case. So there's some plugins that are out there. I've used one called Minimize, where you get a lot of control over what you can hide. So it's all, like a GUI type of thing, checkboxes for different levels. If you don't want editors to see a big chunk of stuff on the page, if they can't do this, can't do that, then you can hide that from them. But it's kind of technically there. So another plugin that I've added it's called New Blog Defaults, and this one's helpful when you're doing, new site setups, because you don't want to necessarily have to go in and configure everything on the for the new site build. There's a couple of other ones that I've seen, I haven't tested, where you can actually clone a site. So once you have everything set up and you can say, all right, this is and if you say you've got 3 different types of clients, you could have 3 default settings, 3 default sites built for that, and you can just say clone this to that. I haven't tested it. It looks solid, but it's one way. But again, you can define some things. One nice thing that I like about this is you can set your comment settings so that automatically whatever, what you think is the best settings for everybody, it's automatically done as soon as you create a blog. Now, if you change something here, this is only for the next one that you build, the next one you create. It doesn't retro to your other settings, so you would have to manually change that. But here's one that I like. Well, this is another, and this is the third plugin that I've added. It's called Additional Privacy, and you've got your choices. Everything. So like say you're doing development stuff, you can set your to block searches by default, or only registered users, or only site administrators. So you don't want it to be front-facing at all to anybody while it's in development, except for your development team who have site administrator, abilities. And then that way it's automatically hidden, no one can see anything. Or you can set it to only to subscribers, and then that way you can give the client the subscriber level at that time, and they can see the work while it's being done. But it's still not accessible by anybody else. Even though you can turn, you can set no follow by default, so it's not being indexed. If you just don't want anybody to see it, you can do this by default every time a new site is built. You can define your permalink structures automatically off the bat. You can define your media sizes. And then this is one that I really like, is the additional categories. So that, let's say, if everybody you build sites for, you always create a set of 6 or 7 categories and subcategories for them. You can set these in this area, and it automatically generates those categories every time a site's created. So you're not doing that. And I don't know if anyone's familiar with a plugin called Site-Wide Tags, but it's a plugin that allows you to take all the content that's created on the subsites and push it to either the main site or another site, so that you can create a giant tag cloud. You can aggregate all that content into a single place. Well, what's nice is if you define your categories from the beginning and then have that set up, then you know that people are going to use those as a starting point, so that when you aggregate that content back to a singular place, you can then filter out, and you don't wind up with one person calling it foo with a lowercase f, foo with a capital F, foo bar, with no space, one with a dash. It's already set so that you've got ID numbers that you can deal with. And then there's the options: delete the comments. You can change the first post so it doesn't say this is your first post, enjoy blogging. It can say whatever, welcome to the first site from such and such company. Like I said, that is, I put these in the multi-user menu. Now that's another thing to touch on, is plugins in general. So if you give people access to turn on and turn off plugins, you've either got the option of giving everybody the plugins menu or hiding it from everybody except for super admins. So you can't turn on and off from the top level that menu. So you're either manually turning plugins on for people or you're allowing everybody to turn them on. You've got one plugins folder, so whatever you put in that plugins folder, everybody's going to see if you give them access to that. So there's not really a granular control over person Y gets these 5 plugins, person X gets these plugins. And you can activate the plugins network-wide or individually per site, but as far as that access to that menu and allowing them to turn things on themselves, that's one of those caveats, is that you really don't get that choice of this person gets to see the plugins menu, this person doesn't,
so
unless you give them super administration access.
You have fine-grained control over what sites get what plugins, but not who has access to modify them.
To turning them on and
You
off.
turn it on.
So like, again, so if you've got some things that only one person will use and some person another use, they won't be able to, you can't filter those out to them. But you can turn on a plugin, so I'll show you the menu real fast. And I don't have anything except for, so you've got the menu now, I've got the must-use, showing the must-use folders. So those are the 3 that are automatically running no matter what. But then if you go to the all menu, you see that you've got the 2 default plugins that come. So you can activate it, and that would only be for that site, and you can network activate it, and that's across the board. Everybody would have that going on. And
I have a question
Yes.
about WordPress New and upgrading to 3.01. I run blog.usf.edu, so
Okay.
I have a bunch of users right now. So do you know of any caveats when upgrading between those 2?
are you on the latest version of multi-user now?
Yeah, I think that's 2.9.
2.9.2, I think, or something like that.
Yeah, I'm on the latest.
I didn't have any problems, and I just upgraded about a month ago.
Yeah.
Personally, I run everything off of SVN, so that the caveat there is that it's 2 separate Subversion repositories, so you can't just do an SVN relocate. You can't. So I had to literally, go in and move my WP content folder out and get rid of all my SVN folders from that,
Right.
and then do a fresh checkout, move everything back. But it upgraded very smoothly for me. I had no problems. I mean, other than the moving, it was a painless process if you follow all of the other steps of, upgrading and WordPress in general.
Sure.
Backups and redundant backups and all that type of stuff. But I mean, it was a very smooth transition, because there's not, other than what features were added into 3.0, like the menus.
Right.
There's really not any differences between 2.9 and 3.0. I mean, there's some minor things, I'm sure, but realistically, other than adding that and a couple of other small features and what other, coding-wise, I don't really see, from my use standpoint, any changes. So
we did a lot to change very little.
right. I mean, I know there was a lot of effort, and there was at one point, and I think it was actually from 2.8 to 2.9.
Right.
You had to add a new table when you did that upgrade.
Yes.
So once you, I mean, that was a little more hairy, I think, from that standpoint. But I had no problems, and like I said, between the 2 installations, just for those, it's about 300 sites, and
Yeah.
it went without the hitch. I mean, I do it in the middle of the night type of stuff, but
Oh, nice. Yeah, I'm planning on doing the upgrade this Wednesday morning, and I ran it on a test environment, and it was fine. I was just wondering if you've ever had any issues. So
not in the. I mean, I had some issues trying to go from 2.6 to 2.8.
Yeah.
And I mean, because there was a lot of custom stuff that they were using when I came on board. I've since weeded out a lot of the custom stuff, and
Yeah.
it's either been built in or I found, updated solutions and those types of things.
Yeah.
I guess the other thing I talk about a little bit is the themes. You set what themes you want anyone to have options on, or you can activate a theme for an individual site. So if you've got a custom design for just that client, and you want to make sure it's only active, available for that particular site, you can do that under, when you go up here in your super admin, you've got your sites menu. And so if you go to edit that, drops it down, right? Where is it? Is it hidden? or maybe because I don't have any other themes, it's not there. But there's a menu in here, would be somewhere on that side, on the right-hand column, which would show you all the themes that you have in your themes directory, and you can manually check off which themes that site and that site only have active. Otherwise, you activate a theme across the network. So you can set a default theme. So if you've got a
You don't actually make available.
make available. No, you can also set which default theme is
Yeah.
available. So you can have 3 active themes, and then you can set in your options, whether it's under the new blog defaults or the options, it'll say what is going to be the theme that you turn on that is active when that site is turned on. So if you use 2010, but like say for instance you have a framework that you use all the time, you can set that as your default theme type of a thing to build, speed up production or however it goes. So that kind of covers, like I said, the caveats are that it's still as many sites as you're running, and you've got that many. You have to worry about the server horsepower to deal with it, and but that's kind of what I would touch on, and just answer any questions. Yep. Yes. Sure. No.
This extra layer of like domain mapping and another plugin check, do you see that adding in terms of scalability, do you see it adding a lot of extra strain on the
I haven't experienced it. I mean, domain mapping is really just some additional URL rewriting through HT rules, as I understand it, and it's a pretty straightforward setup. I mean, and again, because this was originally written as so anybody can sign up, there is a user. Let's say, for instance, you want to open it up to registration for anybody with a particular group, or just open up to the public and use that plugin. They can actually, if they're savvy enough to go to GoDaddy and create a CNAME or an A record and point it, and it'll tell them what IP address to put in there or what CNAME to put in there, and they'll do it. But from a user, from a WordPress developer standpoint, it's pretty straightforward, and there's no additional strain.
I guess I was more concerned too that if you've got 10 plugins in the must-use plugin directory, and one site has another 20 or whatever plugins, just that extra layer of
Again, that really comes down to what the plugins are doing, how well they're written, and however many. If you're running a bunch of WordPress sites, whether it's individual installations on a virtual VPS or a dedicated box, the resources really aren't going to be any different in regards to that. I mean, there's still going to be that level of work that's required. One thing I do recommend, at least from my experience, is I do use a caching plugin, particularly with multi-user like this, is that I use WP Supercache myself. Another thing I'll show real quick, are we out of time?
No, you're good. Just checking that out.
Is I set this in, I've got it marked out, but the auto intervals and post revisions, I define that as like how often it saves, auto saves, and how many revisions it keeps. Simply because when you've got a bunch of sites, you can kind of, I find it to be better.
what's the default?
Indefinite revisions, I think. And I think the interval is pretty low, like 60 seconds, or what? How often does it save auto-save? Is it 120? So I found that, I mean, this is what I use, but because for a blog post, I mean, if I have somebody that really needed to have a lot of revisions for a particular purpose, that would be one thing. Or you got, what's that? Is it 60? That would be the case. But in my business, the types of clients, they're not going to need 10 revisions back. They're going to write the post. They might come back tomorrow and make some changes, and then they might go, "Oh my goodness, I messed up," and want to go back and do that.
So that one forward's dumping everything, all of the last 3.
Well, it just keeps it only keeps 3 revisions in the database. Right. Otherwise, it'll keep. Say for instance, someone is writing a post and they leave their browser window open and they walk away. In theory, it's kind of saving, and it'll save revisions.
If they're not changing anything, it won't make a new revision.
It won't.
Nothing's changed. They'll have an autosave if they've changed that, and they'll keep that up to date. Unless their cats will come on the keyboard.
Well, I've found that I've had when I don't turn that off, for some reason, I don't know what the client might do. They might be changing one letter and hitting save, and changing one letter and hitting save.
Yeah.
but you wind up with 100 revisions of a post, and then when you need to go back and even for them, when they do it, when they compare, they can't even see what the problems were. So, but again, that's user definable. That's not something that's in the WP config file. That's something that I've found that in a multi-site environment, I set that up. And as far as with the domain mapping, like I said, it's a pretty straightforward plugin to set up. Like I said, you do have to edit your Apache config file and set a wildcard DNS, and then whatever, if you're using, like I said, before you could only do subdomains, but now it's either or. And the latest version is pretty good because you can hide that menu completely. You'll only set it in the super menu if you don't want it to even show up under tools.
Cool stuff.
What's that?
I said it was cool stuff. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, well, thanks.